My name is Melissa Jones, and these are my audience members, Luke and Hannah Jones. Again, my name is Melissa Jones, and this is my informative speech on the Bay of Pigs invasion. So, what mental images or word associations come to mind when you think of President John F. Kennedy? Chances are they land somewhere between assassination, the 35th president, the Cuban Missile Crisis, or perhaps even the moon. What about communism? What about the Bay of Pigs invasion? While JFK was one of our most beloved and remembered presidents, his first year in office was marked with several military failures, including the Bay of Pigs invasion. Here's the story and why we don't like talking about it. So when John F. Kennedy took office in January of 1961, he inherited Eisenhower's plan to overthrow Castro. According to NPR.org, Eisenhower believed Fidel Castro to be an imminent threat to the U.S., aligning himself with the Soviets and communism. In the 50s, Fidel Castro led a guerrilla army against the US-backed General Batista, and after 3 years of fighting, he won and named himself prime minister. For 50 years prior to this, America had used Cuba as its playground. Many wealthy Americans established thriving businesses such as sugar plantations and oil refineries. But this all changed when Fidel Castro took control. Immediately, Cuba signed an agreement with the Soviet Union to purchase oil. And when US-backed oil refineries refused to process it, Fidel Castro seized them and broke off relations with the United States. He continued to closely tie himself to the Soviet Union, establishing diplomatic relations. According to CIA.org, he signed several pacts with the Soviet Union to provide economic and military aid in 1960. Castro declared himself a communist and officially aligned himself with the Soviet Union. He then seized remaining American and foreign assets in Cuba. In a climate riddled with the fear of communism, Castro posed an imminent threat just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. So Florida is here in just a small body of water 90 miles north of Cuba. And to give you reference, Murfreesboro is just a little bit less than 90 miles from Clarksville, Tennessee. When Kennedy was elected president and presented with a still evolving plan for the invasion, he agreed, but he knew that the US involvement must remain silent. If America was implicated in this attack, the Soviets would surely retaliate and an all-out nuclear war would ensue. According to the JFK Library, the US believed that several Cuban and military forces would support overthrowing Castro. JFK was reluctant of the plan, but he knew something must be done. So the mission proceeded, but it was doomed from the beginning. On April 15th, 1961, the mission would call for a series of airstrikes against Castro's air defense. Then 1,500 American-trained Cuban exiles would land in the Bay of Pigs, storm the beach, and incite a revolution to overthrow Castro. But from the onset, things did not go well. The ships carrying the 1,500 invaders got hung up in the shallow waters of the bay and were delayed. The first series of airstrikes missed most of their intended targets. And immediately and publicly, Fidel Castro blamed the U.S. for the attacks. When the Cuban foreign minister called an immediate meeting of the UN that afternoon, it became clear that the US had doctored these planes to look like those of Fidel Castro's army. JFK's fear of becoming more and more exposed as the operation proceeded led him to call off the second series of airstrikes, which became the tipping point of the failed invasion. This left Castro with an air defense mostly still intact and time to prepare for the impending invasion. When the 1,500 troops finally landed, they were overrun. With no air support, no artillery, and no weapons, they were taken hostage and held for over a year before the Kennedy administration was able to negotiate their release. Despite its legacy for the time as being one of America's greatest military defeats, its victory would have ensured an American-occupied Cuba, much like a modern-day Iraq. But if history teaches us anything, it's that we don't learn from our mistakes. We should have learned that we cannot assume when we go into another country that immediately the locals will gather and support our cause. Second, that the cure can be far worse than the disease. Fidel Castro, after the failed invasion, became even more powerful and more closely intertwined with the Soviet Union. And presidents should have people on their staff skilled at what to do when things go wrong. But finally, and most importantly, that history does repeat itself when we choose to ignore it. Even if a president as beloved as Kennedy could make such huge mistakes, surely the worst of them could cost us far more than our pride. After the events of the failed invasion were analyzed and cataloged, America began to make the same costly mistakes. According to NPR.org, by one account, the U.S. has forcibly intervened covertly and overtly in over 24 foreign countries, and these numbers do not begin to reflect our presence in Iraq and Afghanistan. The failed attempt to overthrow Castro and the Bay of Pigs invasion directly led to the mounting tension between the U.S. and the Soviet Union and the imminent threat of nuclear war.